Welcome back to New Realities. I'm Alan Steinfeld, and this is an exciting week for me. This is going to be the release of my new book, Making Contact. And the person who leads off the book, kicks off in the first chapter, is my guest today, Nick Pope. Nick Pope worked for the Ministry of Defense in the UK. He's coming from the inside of the phenomena and relaying it over the past couple of years, what he thinks is going on, especially in these latest days. But I just want to show, before we get to Nick, a close-up of my book on Amazon. So if you want to order it, go to Amazon, look for Making Contact, Preparing for the New Realities of Extraterrestrial Existence. And lots of people besides Nick are in there: Linda Moulton Howe, Whitley, Strieber, Grant Cameron. Really the people I feel are the strongest voices in this field who have dedicated their lives to this phenomenon. So Nick, thanks for being here. And
well, thank you. And let me say to you, let me add my voice and say many, many congratulations on the upcoming publication. I mean, I know as an author myself just how long and complicated the process is. I remember when you first reached out to me about this. I mean, it was more than a year ago. So a tremendous amount of work. And I know how satisfying it is to be at this end stage and to actually have it in your hand and things. So congratulations.
Oh, thank you for that. It's like birthing a baby. It really is. And I'd like to just, when I asked you to write the chapter, it all kind of came together, the whole sequence of everything everyone has given me. And like, I needed you to start the book with that real concrete and analysis of the phenomena. Can you just describe briefly what you wrote about in the chapter? And also, can you just tilt your camera a little down, because there's a lot of headroom on there. That's better. Okay, great. So yeah, describe your chapter in more.
Well, it seeks to be an insider's view on the phenomenon in terms of policy and investigation. In other words, everyone has views about UFOs. Some people come to it as a witness or through an experience. Others come to it because it's a passion of theirs and something they've looked at in a sort of private capacity, put a lot of their life into. But there's a small group of people who've looked at this in a slightly different way from within government, whether it's government, the military, or the intelligence community. And it's not necessarily a popular view. And I think we joked about this, and I started off my chapter. I don't know if this line survived the edit, but I said something like, every story needs a villain, and I might be it.
It did survive, because I thought that was a great way to start a narrative with the villains talking, but you're not really the villain in that sense.
Well, thank you. And in any case, in many, many movies, the villains are the far more interesting characters anyway. So maybe I'll embrace that a little bit. I'll own it. I'll own it. But look, no, I mean, the point was, I guess the point was a serious one. To many in the UFO field, the government is the bad guy here. And I'm I suppose to some, the embodiment of that in the UFO community, though there are other people now, of course, like Luis Elizondo, Christopher Mellon, who obviously have looked at this more recently than I. But look, what I tried to do is say, I knew who some of the other people were that you were reaching out to for comments. I mean, so many great people in there, many of whom I count as personal friends. But I felt that quite a lot of them took maybe a slightly different view than I. And I knew that your sort of, big enough personality to take a little bit of dissent and variation. I mean, if everyone in the book was basically just patting each other on the back and agreeing with each other, that would not be the way to go. So I give it to you and to readers really in a different way, through the lens of government, telling people how those of us on the inside view this. And it's not necessarily going to endear me to people, particularly in the New Age and spiritual community. But as I said somewhere, it is what it is.
Right. No, I think actually your dissent or your perspective is very important, because this is what we're dealing with in disclosure, sort of that government point of view. But also, I wanted everyone to have their own opinion, because no one really knows what this phenomena is about. And I thought if we got enough varied opinions, the reader could put together their own sense of it. Does that make sense to you? You know?
Yes, it does. None of us own this subject. None of us sits as final arbiter on this. Certainly not government. I'm not one of these people, far from it. And I think I get into this in the chapter somewhere where I say, ironically, those of us in government are sometimes far less certain about this, less equivocal in our views than many people in the UFO community. Now, I look at the UFO community and I see it as being on a spectrum with true believers and diehard debunkers. And when you get to those, are a lot of reasonable people in the middle, obviously, but at the extreme ends of the belief spectrum, I find a dogmatism that you don't find in government. And many, many times I sat down with colleagues and said, look, we simply don't know, our honest opinions. So that's right. None of us is judge, jury, and certainly not executioner on this. And everybody's view is as valid as everybody else's. And that's what I think so great about your book, that you've got these diverse voices with different backgrounds, different experiences, different areas of specialism, and different opinions.
Yeah, no, absolutely. That is why I wanted to put this together with a variety of authors and contributors, because there's, nobody has the answer, not even what's coming out now. And we'll get into that in a moment. But for me, because I asked you to contribute, and you did such a solid job, that grounded the whole perspective and what was to follow in the preceding chapters. So I think it was important. I wasn't sure the book wasn't going in that direction before I asked you. I thought, yeah, I think, but I didn't want it all new age fluff either, so.
Yeah, I think I split it into essentially two parts, my chapter, as you know. The first part, so that I could tell readers who I am and what my background is in this subject. I went into a lot of detail about my Ministry of Defense research and investigation on this. And I probably went into more detail in terms of the actual nuts and bolts of the job than I have ever done before.
Yes, I really appreciate you doing that. Can you tell us what you put in that essay that you hadn't put in other essays or writings? Yeah,
sure. What I really wanted to do was give a sense of, almost put people inside the office, where very often not everything gets written down. The paper trail, and we do have a paper trail through the declassification and release of the British government files, many of which I wrote, and they certainly tell a good part of the story, but they can never tell all of the story, particularly in a post-Freedom of Information Act environment, where very often people, I'll choose my words carefully, but they are mindful of the act, and they are mindful that things they say may come back to haunt them. So what I wanted to do, which I'd never really done before, is give people a seat at the table so that they could almost imagine themselves in that office, and also give them an insight into, actually, we talked about dissent and differing voices, the differing voices, the factions, the dogfighting that you sometimes find on this within government. And also just an explanation, and I know this has been particularly controversial, of this threat narrative that has run through a lot of recent media articles about this. And I explain where that comes from and why that is the way that government looks at almost everything, not just UFOs, looks at everything in terms of threats and opportunities.
Well, let's go to that first point, the kind of schism within government is that seems to be going on right now within the US. We get people like Luis Alessandro coming forward, and then there seems to be forces that have stopped him from telling the whole truth. He's hinting at a lot, but what do you think is going on right now with Luis Alessandro and the rest of the disclosure unveiling?
Well, I think like anyone who's managed highly classified programs across a range of agencies, Lou has to tread carefully, and clearly he knows exactly where the line is, and he's come. I mean, I've spoken to him about this. I watch a lot of his interviews. I mean, he's an incredibly intelligent, articulate person, and you can see him come right up to that line and not cross it. Rightly so. I think he doesn't characterize himself as a whistleblower, but as an informed commentator on matters. And as and when the government itself is going to declassify and release things, he can comment on it. But he's not going to cross that line, and he's right in that. But when I see and listen to him, to Chris Mellon, to Steve Justice, some of the other people, I see people on the inside, and my goodness, do they choose their words carefully.
Well, what is on the other side of that line? What is that line that they could cross if they were to really disclose?
Well, that line is the law, and on that line is it's the law about unauthorized release of classified information, and worst case scenario on the other side of that line is prison.
But what would that entail? I mean, what would he have to say in order to, like the other day, for instance, someone asked him, I think it was on CNN, well, we have about 3 or 4 videos. Do we have more videos on the government? And I could see him almost burst out laughing. And he said, these are the least of them. We have so much, but that's all he would say. And people in this field want, okay, tell us what do you got? And he doesn't cross that line, I guess, right?
No, and as I say, rightly so. And I think his view is that he and Chris and various other people will doubtless behind the scenes be involved in the briefing process that we know has gone on in Congress to various Senate and House committees, predominantly intelligence committees and armed services committees. The work of the Unidentified Aerial Phenomena Task Force. And of course, as you know, they are working on this upcoming report that Director of National Intelligence has to give to Congress by late June, though there's a debate about whether it will be in on time or not and what it'll say. But Lou and Chris and others are doubtless working hard behind the scenes to do what they can, and they don't want to prejudice that. There is, I talked about this in my chapter, we hinted at it just now, this factional jockeying for position, both in the Ministry of Defense and in the DOD and in other agencies on this. There are factions, there are different voices, and people like Lou and Chris are on one side, but there are, I don't want to use the phrase dark forces, but there you are, I've just used it, on the other side. And I think we just have to, I mean, Lou and Chris, they're skilled players of this game. And I'm not trivializing it by describing it as a game, but
I know.
they have to, they can go so far but no further, but they have got allies, and doubtless what they are thinking, I think, the risk calculus on this is, let's let things play out. Let's let this report come, influence it where we can, if not react to it in an informed way. But let's not derail it by doing things that will play into the hands of the other side, by leaking classified information, getting into situations where they then become the bad guys, etc.
Well, some of that has already happened, but let's just go from your educated background. Who is on the other side? Is it corporate factions? Is it deep state intel? Is it, I mean, maybe you don't know, but you're an educated guess, or is it the ETs themselves that say, no, we're not ready to appear? I mean, who is manipulating this for the last 75 years, in your opinion?
The short answer is I don't know. I mean, I've been out of the game pretty much for some years now, and I occasionally get sort of slightly dragged back in behind the scenes. But look, I don't think I would claim to have a seat at the top table on this now. Right. Let me just put it this way. I think rather than talk about deep state or ETs, I think the safe answer is to say the natural inertia in the system is a big drag on this. And part of that is institutionalized skepticism. Sometimes it comes from science, other times it comes from elsewhere, sometimes even religion. But there is this battle going on behind the scenes, and I think we just have to, in the first instance, just let this run a few more weeks, see what we get, and then take stock.
Is there any corporate influence you feel like, obviously whatever's out there, whatever UAPs are and their means of travel, they're not filling up their gas tank to get here. So is there a corporate suppression involved, in your opinion? Or could be, yeah.
Well, the private sector are undeniably big players, certainly in the wider arena of space. And what we've seen in the last few years is the center of gravity of the space program move away from government and into the private sector. And it's all going to be these billionaire business people, the hedge fund managers, the venture capitalists, the mavericks, many of whom, people, we know the names, obviously, of people like Elon Musk and Yuri Milner. There are many people whose names we don't know, but they're just as powerful behind the scenes. Money talks, and yeah, sure. In a lot of this, there are going to be spin-off derivatives, novel industrial applications, military applications. Some people, if this unfolds the way they'd like it to unfold, will make trillions off of this. Now, that might not be everyone's desired outcome, but look, I mean, even ATIP, as we saw, was put out to contract in the private sector. So yeah, let's not ever lose sight of the fact that big business has a seat at the table.
Well, they might make millions, but they also might lose billions or trillions if we get an energy platform that seems to be, propelling whatever's out there, right? So that's the other side of that.
That is, I guess there's a skeptical argument, a counterbalance to that, to say that throughout history, technologies have been displaced by other technologies. So there were people whose entire fortunes and livelihoods depended upon the horse, and then the horse and the buggy, but they could do nothing to stop the rise of the motor car. Right. And so it may well be that new technologies that may or may not have something to do with UFOs and extraterrestrials will displace oil and gas and things like that. And I think that's inevitable. And I know a lot of people say, well, big oil won't let it happen. History shows they may not have a choice.
Yeah, I agree. The other thing I want to discuss, and because Grant Cameron mentions it, you're chapter 1 in the book, he's chapter 2, and he talks about his title of his essay or contribution is called The Theory of Wow. And he says, for instance, if there's an intelligence behind the phenomena, but he also says, what was I thinking, that that the government is leaking stuff slowly. Well, there was another point I was going to make there, but just getting back to these I'll get back to Grant in a moment, because this other idea came about, I wanted to talk to you about. Oh yeah, this is what Grant says. The government gives us a little information and then takes it back. So they'll say, okay, here's some videos that yes, are UFOs, okayed by the Navy, but then they say, no, they're not. And so it seems to be happening now, a sort of give and take. When you listen to Chris Mellon and Luis Alessandro being asked, well, do we have crash retrievals? Do we have ships? They said, well, they hedge it. And then in the July 23rd article of July 23rd, 2020, it's right there in the New York Times that Eric Davis briefed the Intelligence Committee on crash retrieval saucers, or whatever you want to call these objects. So they say it in the New York Times, and then Chris Mellon and Luis Alessandro say, well, we don't know. So what do you make of that?
Well, the whole leaking of information, and there have been several leaks. I mean, one could say that the 3 US Navy videos that we saw at the end of 2017, beginning of 2018, were themselves leaked. And indeed, the Department of Defense used the phrase unauthorized to describe the previous release at the point when they posted them on their website and did the press release. And more recently, with the still photos and videos of UFOs apparently in close proximity to US Navy ships, more recent incidents, they again used the phrase unauthorized to describe the way in which these official photos, I mean, genuinely taken by US Navy personnel, found their way into the media. Now, who's doing the leaking is one of the most interesting questions that hasn't really been asked as much as it should. And you can, I mean, if you really study this closely, you can get a pretty good idea, because you can say, well, what are the leaks?
Right.
What are the media outlets that they appeared in? And who else of all the players in this are closely associated with and regularly appear on and are quoted in those same media outlets? And you can kind of draw I guess it's a sort of wiring diagram of who connects to what, and you can kind of figure it out. And that tells you something interesting. But again, it plays in the more interesting question isn't so much who's leaking, but why they are leaking. And generally speaking, when somebody leaks, they do it for a couple of different reasons. I mean, well, 2 or 3 different reasons. Sometimes it's just malicious. That's not what we're dealing with here.
No, we're dealing with planned leaks. We're dealing with organized, calculated leaking. Yes.
Yeah. Sometimes it's actually the government itself doing the leaking, but putting a little bit of clear blue water, a little bit of distance, a little bit of plausible deniability. But there's an old saying, and it was used in the British comedy series on the political system, Yes, Minister. And the saying is, the ship of state is the only ship that leaks from the top. So very often, leaking is actually government policy. And there are a number of reasons you do it. Sometimes you do it to trial a policy. You float something to see what the reaction would be, but you can't be seen to have done it yourself. So you use a proxy. Sometimes it's about getting out ahead of the narrative. Sometimes it reflects the kind of factionalism that I talked about earlier, this dogfight over what the phenomenon is, how we should respond to it. Again, so watch the leaking. It's a very important part of all this. And as I say, sometimes it's used to maybe drive the debate and influence the debate on a policy issue.
Well, not to make you into a radical, but do you think the government should be dismantled at this level of secrecy? Because it doesn't seem to be working. We're sort of onto their game. And it seems like, yes, I know the idea of threat and all that and protecting the public, but something else. Is it really a threat? Is that just the name to kind of keep the cards held close to the chest? Is, you know what I'm asking? Should it be handled differently?
Yes.
Yeah.
I think it could be handled differently. One thing that we haven't talked about today, but I do go into it in the chapter somewhat, is the idea of technology acquisition. Yeah. And I mean, it ties back with what I guess we were saying about big business being involved. And this is a little bit more about the why. There are some people who believe that a fuller understanding of the phenomenon, whatever its true nature, will have technology acquisition implications. And obviously in government, when we talk about threats, one big threat is that an adversary will get there before us. Right. And a lesser threat is that an ally will. And you may say, well, that's not as big a deal. And no, it isn't. But look, if there are going to be trillions to be made, every government who's in that card game, if I can call it that, will want to be the one with the winning hand and will not want to show their cards to other players around the table, even if some of those players happen to be friends.
I get it. Yeah. So okay, I get that perspective. And I know that's the sort of, I don't think the phenomena is a threat as it's been labeled for whatever reason. And it would be, just my opinion, to just let it all out of the bag, whatever messy chaos that might cause. That's just my opinion. But getting back to Eric Davis, what do you think of his briefing to the Senate Intelligence Committee about these crash retrievals? I mean, that is beyond disclosure. That's a sort of confirmation. What do you think of that?
Yeah, I will get to that. I just wanted to circle back on one previous point and say that on the threat thing, there is two other reasons the government does talk up the threat narrative. Is firstly, of course, to get funding for this. Right. If you go to somebody, if you're a junior or middle ranking subject matter expert on this, and you want funding and you want engagement, buy-in from senior stakeholders in the system, you're not going to go and get that by talking about this as an interesting conundrum. You will get there by talking up the threat narrative. So you'll go into the brief and you'll say, well, there's something in our airspace. It might be Russia. It might be China. It might be something else. We need to find out. Give us some money and some resources. And everyone will go, gosh, yes, because they've heard Putin talk about hypersonic weapons. They've read the stories about AI-controlled drone swarms. They know what's coming. So that's one reason. And the other reason is that it's always better to assume there's a threat and be relieved if one doesn't materialize than assume that it's friendly and then get caught out if it isn't. So with with that,
That's a sort of English perspective, I think,
well,
Yes.
I'm not sure it is. I mean,
Okay,
yes,
maybe it's not.
yes, it is, but I suspect it's the perspective in the United States too.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
but I don't want to be accused of dodging your question on Eric Davis, because it is very important. And my basic answer to that is those comments could well be a smoking gun if, and this is a big if we could be exactly clear where the dividing line is between what he knows and what he thinks. So I don't know, when I listen to Eric, when I see the things that he's briefed, I don't know quite where that line is, quite where he segues from knowledge over into speculation and belief. If we knew that, then other things will fall out of it.
Right. No, I get that. And I don't know either. And it would be great to talk to Eric about that. And actually, if they have crash retrievals, let's roll them out to the public. I mean, and that goes along with my next question. What if, and this is a big if, it was all just let out, all governments, and it's kind of idealistic, but let's just tell everyone what we know, what they don't know. And I think that's the big problem. They don't know what this phenomenon is. They don't know how to predict it. They don't know how to control it. But what do you think would happen if the government said, yeah, since Roswell or before, there's been visitors and we have these ships and maybe we reversed engineer and we are being visited and it doesn't seem like a threat, but maybe, what if it was just all rolled out? What would be the result of that?
I think if we're in a situation where there is a binary disclosure that can be made, I mean, there is literally, for example, a spaceship in a hangar. Disclosure then is very easy because you can roll up the hangar door and say, there it is. Now, all sorts of other things would fall out of that, but it's doable. And all the excuses that you sometimes hear about panic in the streets and undermining world religion. Well, I've been to conferences where this has actually been discussed, and it's all those objections don't hold water. The technology acquisition is a problem, but to answer your question, yeah, you can do it. But if it's not quite so binary, not quite so black and white, if it's, yes, there's something, but we're not exactly sure what, yes, there is a faction in government that believes it's extraterrestrial, but there are other factions with different theories. That's not so easy because no government wants to disclose that they don't know or that they can't make up their minds. So it becomes a little bit more messy. But let me just round off that thought by floating another idea. And that idea is this: what if it's not up to the government at all? What if something is coming? What if 80 odd years or so of secrecy is fine up to a certain point, and that point is around about 3 years ago, at which point, let's say, a faction thought, we can't keep this secret anymore. Firstly, there's a sort of critical mass building up of pilots and radar operators and actual data. But secondly, this is the bigger thing, either our technology getting to the point where if they are out there, we will find them, we will see them. And I'm talking about satellites and space tracking radars and technologies no longer in the hands just of government, but in the next few months and years, the private sector. What if that's the point, that government says, you know what, we can't keep it secret anymore. Or there's something about the phenomenon itself. There's something is coming, whether it's literally something coming or simply reaching the point where secrecy is no longer possible. In that scenario, you want to get out in front of the narrative. You want to be driving and leading the conversation, not reacting to it. What would the government do? Pretty much what they've done for the last 3.5 years.
That is an excellent point, and that is probably one of the most valuable things I've heard you say. Not that the other stuff isn't valuable, but that what if, and based on your educated background, I think seems to be what's been cracking in the cosmic secret. But one thing to add to that, of course, what's been happening in the last 3 years is they're not giving us a history. They're saying this phenomenon is happening as if it just all of a sudden occurred in 2004, beginning there, and they're ignoring the 75 years since Roswell or before. So there's a little bit of a play in that, right? I mean, I saw you smile there. So it's like, oh wow, yes, this thing is happening. So what do you think of that?
Yeah, I think it maybe goes back to the point about when I said, yes, you could disclose, but an awful lot of other things would fall out of it.
Yeah.
Just speaking hypothetically, but I've heard people mention, for example, what if extraterrestrial visitation is real? And what if some of the accounts that one hears of alien abductions are real? And what if there was a degree of either complicity from the government, or at least a sort of turning a blind eye, look the other way? Well, I've heard people, for example, mention class action suits from abductees. What about the people whose reputations were trashed?
Yeah,
because they, in the early days, spoke out about this. Scientists, academics. What if it is revealed that these people were the target of a sort of dirty tricks campaign? There would have to be a sort of truth and reconciliation committee, like you saw after the end of apartheid in South Africa, for example. And so that's why, you know what, this goes into the basket, to borrow Stan Friedman's old term, not the gray basket, but what we in government call the it's all too difficult basket. So it's much easier to say, hey, you know what, this started in about 2004 with the Nimitz, than to say, hey, there's an 80-year backstory here, because nobody wants to be held responsible for what somebody did nearly 80 years ago.
Well, yeah, I know exactly what you're saying, and but that's too bad, because along with the backstory comes the real essence of truth behind the phenomena. But let's just take the gems that have been given, in a sense, and move forward while we're in this momentum. So what do you think might be revealed? But even before that, what do you make of the last leaked video of the pyramid shaped object in the sky? What do you make of that? What is that?
I don't know what it is. And in some ways, and I know this sounds counterintuitive, but what you're actually seeing on those videos and in those still images is almost the least interesting thing about this whole saga, because I don't know. And frankly, I don't think anyone outside a very small select group of intelligence community imagery analysts really knows what they're looking at. There are all sorts of debates, as you know, going on about, is this just a camera effect? Could it be this? Could it be that? I don't know. Like I say, it's the least interesting thing. Very few of us, certainly not me, are qualified to say what we're looking at. I don't know. But it goes back. It goes back to what I was saying. It goes about how important it is to watch who's leaking what to where and why.
Well, that goes with this other question. We'll get to the disclosure report in a second, but why or how was it given to George Knapp and Jeremy Corbell? How is that thing sort of manipulated, and why them, do you think?
Well, I don't have definitive chapter and verse on that, and I don't think. Yeah, I don't really want to get into speculation about that.
Okay.
I think it gets into some difficult areas.
Okay, that's fine. But it is unusual. I mean, with the previous, it's like, okay, 8 tip to the stars. That was a kind of easy handoff, but it gets a little deeper. But okay, so yes, sometime in June, it's been declared or written that the intelligence committees must come forward, I suppose. And you get Luis Elizondo saying on the debrief, if you saw that, well, there's 18 different intelligence committees. I don't think they're going to have all the reports. This should be ongoing. So what do you think we're going to see in June, at some point in June?
Well, I saw Lou's comments, yes.
Yeah.
And Chris Mellon has made some similar comments. Marco Rubio, of course, has speculated that the report may well not come in on time. And in one sense, he's probably sending a message that, look, I would rather, if you delay it, but we get a proper detailed deep dive into this, that's better than rushing something out that doesn't tell the whole story. And Lou, of course, absolutely has hit the nail on the head. The single most difficult thing in all of this is the sort of point at which, and hopefully they're well down this road, but the point at which the people drafting this report for DNI and actually doing the study, whether it's the UAP task force and or others, it's getting those people into the offices of the people they need to talk to. And very often, even identifying who is it in these different parts of the US intelligence community that I need to go and see. Which agencies have active programs? Which agencies have historic files on this? Do I have the relevant security clearance and need to know, and et cetera, that will even get me into that person's office to have that conversation with them. And I've sat on a few government studies, actually not on UFOs, on other very sensitive business. And right at the beginning of the study, often the hardest part is drawing up the list of who are the experts on this and can I get FaceTime with them? Right. So it's a huge struggle.
When you say, can I get FaceTime, aren't they working for the government that sort of demands, FaceTime with these intelligence agencies?
Yes, up to a point, but you're dealing with people who if their phone rings and somebody says, hey, we've got some people doing a report for Congress into one of your most highly classified, deeply compartmentalized, incredibly sensitive programs, your knee-jerk reaction isn't great. I'll clear my diary and I look forward to seeing this person. It's very often, oh, shoot, now what do we do?
Well, yeah, you get subpoenaed, you demand it by congressional hearings. I mean, that's a whole other thing. We're not there yet, of course, but something's coming. I mean, Chris Mellon, I think it was in the Fox interview with Tucker Carlson, said, we got something incredible coming. Do you remember that? Did you hear him say that on the Tucker Carlson?
Yeah, I can't recall that exact turn of phrase.
Well, it wasn't that exact term, but it was something very dramatic. It sounded like.
Well, I certainly hope he's right. I really do. I mean, of course, as you know, the report must be unclassified. It can have a classified annex to it, and clearly that's where the really interesting things will be. But I think I go back to my point about factionalism. I think what goes into that report in the first place is going to depend on how this factional dogfight, if I can call it that, plays out. Are we going to get a speculative report about, extraterrestrials and visitation? Have they ruled that out? No, I don't think they have. If they haven't ruled it out, are we going to get some interesting speculation? Or are we simply going to get a report focusing on the drone threat and next generation aerospace technologies, and just as almost a throwaway line somewhere saying, and not all of these sightings can be identified, some remain unexplained, and we don't necessarily take more exotic options off the table, but not say much more than that.
Well, let me show you a little bit, if you have a little time, what Chris Mellon said to Tucker Carlson. Oh, is that okay? Just a little rolling? Okay. This is, I don't know when this was, maybe sometime in early April.
In the United States, he's a former Pentagon official, and he joins us tonight for a preview of what we may find out. Chris, I appreciate your coming on tonight. What do you think we're going to learn in this report?
Well, thanks very much, Tucker, and thanks for drawing attention to this issue. I think it could be profound and transformative, as a former DNI, John Ratcliffe, suggested, because in 1970, when Project Blue Book concluded, they concluded and told the American people, we don't see any evidence of technological breakthroughs beyond anything that we can do ourselves. We don't see any evidence of a threat to national security. I don't think they can honestly say either of those things in this case. And as people begin to digest that, and they are going to address this at an unclassified level, so that'll be a public statement, I think that's going to raise a lot of questions and send some shockwaves.
So they've been lying. I mean, I think we can say that, and who knows why, but that really is the question. Why? Why haven't we heard this before? It's a huge deal. It could change our perception of our place in the universe, really. Why hasn't anyone come forward with this prior to this coming June?
It's largely been a matter of stigma, and people are afraid to discuss it. It's shocking, and this is how I got involved. I became aware in 2016 that U.S. Navy squadrons operating off the East Coast of the United States were having recurring encounters with these vehicles, and nobody in the intelligence community was responding. Nobody was supporting them. Nobody was backing them up. Nobody was investigating. It was not being reported up the chain of command. The Secretary of Defense didn't know. It wasn't a matter of concealing the information in the sense of they knew it and processed it and withheld it from the public. It was a matter of hear no evil, see no evil.
I don't necessarily believe that, that last part, that like, somebody was getting notified up the chain of command. What's your response to Chris Mellon there?
Well, yes, thank you for reminding me of that interview. Yes, and I think he did use phrases like words like profound and things like that. But I think he was careful, as you'd expect, and he said this could be. Right. I think that reflects that we are now at a sort of fork in the road. We really are. And there is a left-hand turn and a right-hand turn. And we're not quite maybe at the point where we know which way it's going to go. Because, of course, DNI herself is going to have to sign off on this. I don't know whether she's already had a brief on the interim findings.
DNI is the defense. What is
Director of National Intelligence.
Oh, okay.
So she'll be the one actually sending the report. It will go out under her signature.
Well, who is the Director of National Intelligence?
I do apologize. The name I'm still learning the names of the new administration. It's still a bit of a shock to me. My goodness, I should know, but I don't.
Okay, but anyway, the report will go to the Director of the National Intelligence, and then what will happen?
Well, she will get a draft for her signature. These people don't write the reports themselves, obviously. The study team will go and do the study. They will draft the report for her. She will then have a meeting with the team leader, other subject matter experts. If she's happy for it to go out under her signature, she'll sign off on it. If not, she'll send it back and say, go take another run at this. So there's a lot of ways this could play out.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know what, as I say, I don't know what initial briefings she's had on this. Like everyone, she's new in post. That's an issue. It may help or it may hinder that her predecessor as DNI, John Ratcliffe, has been kind of giving media interviews on this, maybe steering things a little bit. But
Mm-hmm.
she'll have to take a view on this, and it's going to be a big call.
Mm-hmm. Are you excited? Just personally, I'm just curious because you've been in the field for so long. Is this something you're looking forward to, or you're not expecting?
Yeah,
Okay.
I mean, whatever happens, it's going to be interesting. Even if we get nothing, the fact that we get nothing will be interesting in and of itself. But I always remember an old adage that they taught us in this kind of field, and it's along the lines of, well, when there's been all this denial on anything, but when somebody suddenly flips the narrative and tries to draw your attention to something, almost as if they're putting it in the spotlight after years in the shadows, and the question is, why would they do that? One possible answer is to distract us from something else.
What would you think that be? What could that be?
I couldn't possibly say, but I just throw that in, and I'll let you and everyone watching kind of, put that in their pipe and smoke it.
Right. And I'm sure they are doing that. One more question, because I just curious, the term UAP, unexplained aerial phenomena, has now become the catchphrase for UFOs. Was that originated in the UK when you were there, or what's the origin of UAPs?
Well, they're nicely asked, because it goes back to my chapter.
Yes.
And I talk about this. We didn't invent it, but in the Ministry of Defense in the 90s, in our classified policy discussions about the nature of the phenomenon and how to handle it, we substituted UAP for UFO. And indeed, one of the US Navy spokespeople recently tipped his hat to us and said, yeah, that comes to us, that phrase comes to us courtesy of the British government. So we didn't invent it, but we popularized it for government use. And I attended in June of 2011 a briefing in Washington, D.C., where this was briefed to the various people there, who included a number of political figures, military figures, at least one former CIA director, and they were all very interested in that. And so that's one of my little post-retirement contributions, is playing a part in getting UAP used in the US government for this.
Who did create that term? I'm curious. Do you know the origins?
You know what? I don't. I'm sure it probably came from the UFO community somewhere, maybe as far back as the 50s. That wasn't really our point. Our point was that it rebranded the phenomenon. It enabled us to jettison the pop culture baggage that the term UFO had.
But I'm also, it's not just a rebranding. Basically the difference is going from object to phenomena. And when you're calling whatever out there a phenomena, you're including a lot more possibility than object, right?
We are. It's think of it as a reset. Think of it as us building back better.
Right. Well, thank you, Nick. I look forward to more conversations. Nick and I are going to be on WBAI Heart of Mind this Friday with Catherine Davis. Look at WBAI 99.5 FM in New York. And anything else coming up for you, Nick, because you are the go-to guy in this field.
Well, my goodness, I can't recall a time when I've been so busy with media requests, whether it's journalists working on stories, whether it's upcoming TV shows. I think I was up at 4 this morning doing a live TV news slot on all of this. So busy times.
Well, look for Nick Pope. He is the go-to guy. He's on CNN, Fox News, New York Post has done a whole feature series with Nick and Stephen Greenstreet. So he is out there, and you're going to see more of Nick as these reports start to become more and more public, as whatever the story is about to unfold in a big way. Nick is going to be there. And thank you for writing the opening chapter, which really sets the tone for the rest of the book, Making Contact, which is out this week, May 4th, on Amazon. You can order it there. And also I have coming up today an interview with Ralph Blumenthal, who first broke the story in the New York Times on December 16th, 2017. Tomorrow there's an interview with Whitley, Strieber, Linda Moulton Howe, and JJ and Desiree Hurtak about more chapters in the book. So any final words there, Nick?
No, just to say again, congratulations with the publication of the book. I hope that a lot of people will read it, and my goodness, it couldn't be coming out at a more interesting and pivotal moment.
That's right. This is the book, Making Contact, Preparing for the New Realities of Extraterrestrial Existence. You can pre-order it now. It goes on the book stands May 4th. May the 4th be with you, some people are saying. And it is a real good overview, if I must say, of the phenomenon with experts in the field like Nick and Linda Moulton Howe and Whitley Strieber and Grant Cameron, people I really respect in this field who've dedicated their lives to this. So look for that, buy it, and give it to a friend who knows nothing about this as an introduction. It really is a good introduction. You should be getting your copy soon. This is Alan Steinfeld for New Realities, and thank you for tuning in, and stay tuned for more live broadcasts, particularly on the subject. Also, Nick is going to be at Contact in the Desert, probably an online version of Contact in the Desert coming up in June, probably the best conference, live or online, around this phenomenon. So tune in to Contact in the Desert. Go to that website, contactinthedesert.com, and you're not going to be disappointed with the amount of information, as this topic really